Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives. Saving America with Dr. David D. Schein.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. Death in D.C. By now, I believe my audience knows that 2 brave West Virginia National Guard members were shot and 1 died in the District of Columbia. They were providing security to residents and visitors to Washington, D.C. Sarah Beckstrom was only 20 years old and died on Thanksgiving. Staff Sgt. Andrew Wolfe, only 24, remains in critical condition. I want to extend my heartfelt sympathies to Sergeant Wolfe and the families of both of them. This should not have happened. Per legal protocol, I am required to say that the alleged shooter, despite apparent detailed videos of the shooting, was a 29-year-old Afghan national. He was a support asset to the CIA during the years of the USA presence in his country. He was evacuated with many others after the bumbling Biden-Harris administration abandoned the country and the valuable airfields in the worst retreat in American history. The problem is that this guy was hired to help the U.S. kill Taliban. He was not vetted for admission to this country as a future resident and member of our society. Therefore, they really don't know what this guy was really like. Further, some have suggested he was radicalized after he got here about 4 years ago. Others have suggested PTSD. I don't like that suggestion since a death penalty is on the table. The last thing we need is him getting off on a mental defect defense. No matter what, America needs to do a better job of vetting people coming to this country. Boko Haram kidnapping of over 300 Nigerian Catholic students and teachers. Nigeria is not a poor country. It's been selling oil to the rest of the world. Boko Haram is an Islamic terrorist group that started around 2009 in Nigeria with their aim to impose Sharia law on the people and create terror for the sensible people of Nigeria. Why the Nigerian government did not crush this movement earlier is beyond me. It will be harder now, obviously. On top of a history of tragedy in Nigeria, mostly consisting of mass murders and kidnapping of Christians and burning of churches, we have a new tragedy. At least 315 Catholic students and teachers were kidnapped by Boko Haram. Even the Pope has now called for their safe return. He should have called for a new crusade to exterminate this threat, not just to Nigerian Christians, but to civilization itself. The odd twisted story is that 50 of the children somehow escaped and are safe with their families. Then there was another mass kidnapping about a week earlier of 25 girls. 2 teachers were killed in the attack. The reports are that one of the girls escaped and the other 24 have now been freed. Details are lacking. I don't know if that means a ransom was paid. Of course, the problem with paying ransom is it encourages more kidnappings, right? According to the AP, since 2014, there have been at least 1,799 students have been kidnapped since then. Better security by the facilities backed by serious police and armed forces protection is a necessity. This show is called Saving America. The attempts in the U.S. and around the world to disrupt Judeo-Christian value system is real and increasing. This threat should make every sensible American very concerned, even if you're not religious. Speaking of who is concerned and not concerned, where are the Muslim clerics who should be condemning these horrific acts? I am hearing crickets from that group. These clerics claim to want to be accepted by leaders and followers of other religions, so they need to join the good guys. Otherwise, their silence does the talking for them. The U.S. State Department has begun to rattle sanctions after Trump came out strongly against the continued Christian genocide. That should have happened already. I understand the U.S. provides foreign aid to Nigeria. Time to stop every penny until we show themselves worthy of the support that we give them. We should also be boycotting their oil or other exports like we do for Russia and other offending countries. Job market report is double expectations. Due to the Dems' record-long shutdown of the government, the September jobs report was delayed. However, it was a shot of good news for the Trump administration, with about 119,000 jobs created versus the 50,000 jobs which were projected. However, the unemployment rate did tick up a little bit to 4.4% from 4.3%, still well below the historic number of 5% for full employment. The latest economic data is also a positive, with good economic growth in the private sector, although somewhat muted by the Dems government shutdown. There is now talk of a GOP plan to reduce the cost of health care. Let's see how far that goes. The Dems claim that their damaging record government shutdown was over health care costs. Let's see if they cooperate with the GOP now. SCOTUS jumps into Texas redistricting. Action is rolling on the redistricting front. I am sure that my audience is aware of the roller coaster of Texas changing its district maps in time for the 2026 primaries, and in retaliation, Gavin No Sense got California to redistrict. Well, if that was not enough, the Texas redistricting plan was challenged in federal court. A 3-judge panel of district court judges voted 2-1 against this plan by issuing an injunction. And that would affect the 2026 lines, claiming that the new districts were racially discriminatory. This was the headline news. Well, SCOTUS has scooped the headline, with Justice Alito issuing a stay on their injunction until there's a full hearing on the merits. That means the new district lines may be the ones in effect for the 2026 primary, which is coming up fast. As I've said recently, I can't wait for those new congressional districts, since that gives me a chance at having at least a half-competent member of Congress. I've been in District 18 for a long time and have never had a decent congressional rep in the many years I've lived here. With sky-high beef prices, a surprise announcement. Major food producer Tyson Foods has announced that it's going to close its largest beef plant in Nebraska. The cover story is that due to the reduced demand for beef, its other plants can cover the demand. Part of the issue is that cattle production itself is way down, so there's a reduced supply of cattle for the processing plants. Getting cattle ready for market is a 4-year process, so this simple issue cannot be handled without increasing the supply. Of course, if Tyson and other producers lowered their prices, demand might pick up. After all, Americans love their steaks and burgers. This is a tough break for the over 3,000 employees at that plant, as well as beef-eating Americans. Prices will likely stay the same or increase as a result of this announcement. Trump recently announced that he would be reducing tariffs on beef from certain countries, so that could help the supply side and increase the demand for the processing facilities. So we're going to see how that all works out, right? Hong Kong disaster. Would it have happened under the British? The CCP cannot be trusted. That is an absolute truth of our time. When the British control of Hong Kong ended in the mid-1990s, the deal with mainland China was that as much as possible, it would be a self-governing operation. Of course, the CCP did not honor that deal with the Brits for even a few minutes after the Brits surrendered control. The smart residents fled in large numbers prior to that takeover. A stunning human tragedy has taken place in Hong Kong, and videos have been broadcast on the world stage. 7 buildings of a group of high-rise buildings burst into flames. The CCP admits to 128 dead, which means the number is probably much higher. This was due to renovations being done with bamboo scaffolding and amazingly highly combustible styrofoam being used around the windows. Later reports indicate that the fire alarms did not work in any of the 8 high-rises. This kind of shoddy work is a highlight of China under the CCP. Like Xi's buddy Putin, they do not value human life. Many of our younger generation do not know about the failure known as the USSR or the Iron Curtain. You can educate them with this and many other failures and murders taking place under the CCP and Putin. A member of Congress reportedly texted with Jeffrey Epstein during his congressional testimony a few years ago. As I've said before, I cannot make this stuff up. So the story is that a Dem representative from the U.S. Virgin Islands actually texted with pedophile Jeffrey Epstein while he was testifying in Congress in 2016. The representative's name is Stacey Plaskett. I've never heard of her and did not know that the USVI even had a representative. She admits that she knew Epstein. After all, he was a big Dem donor. However, she claims that she did not know he was a pedophile at the time she was texting with him. Keep in mind that Epstein pled guilty to solicitation of prostitution and solicitation of a minor for prostitution in 2008 in exchange for a sweetheart deal. He served 13 months of an 18-month sentence in jail. So I'm incredulous that she could claim that she did not know this in 2016. To add to the humor, disgrace to Texas and America, Dem Representative Jasmine Crockett claimed it was no big deal since Jeffrey Epstein had also donated to some GOP candidates. The problem for that moron is that these were one or more other Jeffrey Epsteins, not the one who was the pedophile. Tough luck, Miss Crockett.
All rise.
For 20 years, she worked and lived in D.C., worked for 2 Democratic senators and Democrat appointees at federal agencies, government contractors, and several nonprofit organizations. She was a disability advocate and lobbyist working alongside people with disabilities to expand and improve federal disability programs. Then something happened that opened her eyes to the fact that she had somehow become a member of a cult working to bring about a cultural revolution in the United States. She moved to a farm in Virginia in 2020 after she woke up and deprogrammed herself. She lives with her fiance, their 5 dogs and chickens on their farm where they grow organic fruits and vegetables. She is the author of Deprogramming Democrats and Uneducating the Elites. Lisa Ekman earned her law degree from Georgetown University, a master's in social work from the University of Denver, and a bachelor's in communication and rhetoric from Northwestern University. We welcome Lisa Ekman for her first appearance on Saving America.
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be here, David.
It's our pleasure to have you talk with us today. As you know, we ask our guests 3 basic questions. Share with our audience what caused you to start down that 20-year path in the Democratic camp in the very first place.
I was raised in a family of liberal parents. My parents were, I like to say, hippies who didn't do drugs, even though some people say that's an oxymoron, but that was them. They very much were classical liberals who believed in America. They were patriotic. They believed in the Constitution, especially the First Amendment and all the parts that are part of that. And you know, they believed in equality. They believed in human rights, and they believed in working to help make our society better, all within the context of the greatness of the American experiment. And so, you know, I followed very much in their footsteps in terms of what most people do in terms of following the politics of their parents. And, you know, they loved Jimmy Carter and hated Ronald Reagan. And that was sort of the first introduction to politics I had in the 80s when I was going to middle school, high school, and starting college was Ronald Reagan's and 8 years of administration. And so I kind of followed along in that. And when I went to social work school, that was in the 1997 to 1999, and you can't really find a more left-leaning school, probably maybe the gender studies department, but the social work department is generally very left-leaning. And so I sort of learned more of those values as my social work values. But I also realized when I was at social work school that I didn't have the constitution. I wasn't cut out to directly see patient or clients, because I had a difficulty maintaining my own mental health while helping other people with theirs. And so I decided I might want to get into the policy world. And so I was nominated by the dean of my school to a program called the Presidential Management Internship Program, which was designed to pull people with graduate level education into federal service, and ended up taking a job working directly for a Bill Clinton appointee at the Social Security Administration at the very tail end of the Clinton administration, and then proceeded to grow more and more enshrined in the democratic apparatus and machinery. When I was at Georgetown, I went to law school once I moved to DC, and I was the president of the Georgetown Law Democrats. So I used to say I bled blue, and I would vote blue no matter who, which, if that isn't a cult-like saying, I don't know what is, really. So that's sort of where my politics came from and how I ended up in DC. And I think obviously I have a lot of education, and I value my family valued education a lot. And I think that over time, our education system has been really hijacked and pulled to a place that is very anti-American and very much part of the effort to indoctrinate people towards an anti-capitalist, anti-America view, to effectuate the cultural revolution that you mentioned in your introduction of me. So I spent a lot of time being indoctrinated in the halls of these different institutions, and then the sort of tribalism that has occurred over the past 25 years in dividing everybody into teams. I fell squarely in the blue team. Go team blue. So that's sort of where that came from.
I gotcha. So there was a special realization for you that caused you to change your perspective. Why don't you expand on that a little bit for our audience?
Sure. I will tell a quick story prior to when it actually happened, because it was important for me to be in the right frame of mind. There were two things. One was that I did see Washington change a great deal over the time I was there, from a place where you could have disagreements on policy and you didn't view them as moral failings, and you didn't attack the people who you disagreed with personally. It was all about figuring out how we can make our country better. But that completely disappeared over the 20 years that I was there. And I would blame that in two things. One being the rise of social media and sort of the echo chambers and information bubbles people found themselves in, but also the election of Barack Obama, who I believe worked actually to really divide our country as opposed to bringing us together and uniting us, and making the rise of identity politics, which happened as well, which served to make us focus on our differences rather than the things we all have in common as Americans and as human beings. But in 2014, and I lost my father to illness, and in 2016, I lost my mother to illness. And my mom was taking care of my dad after he had some catastrophic complications due to surgery, and she had multiple sclerosis at the time, and she was his primary caregiver. As a result of all that stress and her already ill health, she ended up being diagnosed with stage 4 of an extremely aggressive cancer, and was told she might have a very short time to live and she should get her affairs in order. So I did a bunch of research to try to help figure out what could she do besides just getting conventional treatment in order to help improve her chances of survival. And this was at her request that I did this. So she ended up changing everything about her diet, what she put in and on her body, and everything else to try to help manage stress. And as a result of doing that, she did get the surgery and start chemotherapy. But before she finished her first round of chemo, she was cancer-free. And she stayed that way for 2 years until she took one more chemo treatment, which fried her kidneys, and she died. And So this raised a lot of questions in my mind about the health advice we were being given by these agencies that were supposedly designed to help us stay healthy, and started to create some cracks in the dam that was holding back the flood of truth from me about who our government on both sides of the aisle was actually serving. And it wasn't we the people, but the establishment and the moneyed interest. So those cracks were there, but I had to go back to work and work with those very same agencies, David. So I kind of pigeonholed that in the back of my mind, went back to work. Fast forward from 2016 to 2020, we're now in end of March of 2020, I had scheduled to retire because of the division that I was talking about. I started to feel like I couldn't really make a positive difference in Washington, D.C. anymore. I'm not sure that I ever really could have, but at that point I had just thought, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm done with the arguing, the division, the assumption that the person on the other side is a bad person. I don't think I am making a difference anymore. So I then was scheduled to retire March 31st, 2020, right a few weeks after we were taking 2 weeks to flatten the curve on COVID. And so this is when that knowledge I had gained when I did all that research for my mom started to come into play, because I was a researcher. I looked at data and evidence. That's what I did for a living. And I started to try to look for evidence to support what the government was doing in terms of their recommendations. And quite frankly, there wasn't any. And I'll use one example. If you recall back to the very beginning of COVID, they told us we couldn't leave our house unless we were an essential worker. You got to stay home. Well, one of the most best things you can do for your health is get some vitamin D, right? Go look at the NIH website covered with studies, get some vitamin D. Well, the best way to do that is to get some sun, you know? And the other thing that does is if you go outside and get some sun, you're also breathing fresh air instead of recycled air that maybe if you're in an apartment building, you're getting some of the air from your other residents. So this made absolutely no sense to me. And so it started to bring back all of those questions that had been raised in my mind. And my boyfriend at the time, who is my partner now, he wasn't buying the narrative. He was sort of in the same camp of the people who, signed the Great Barrington Declaration saying, we should protect the vulnerable, but everybody else's life should go on as it was. And so he and I were going at it, verbally sparring, and he kept saying, show me data, prove me wrong. And so was everyone who was questioning the narrative. And then that's when the censorship started happening of natural health providers who I had started following after my mom, I did the research for my mom. And some of them were among the disinformation dozen, if you remember that category of people who were censored and shut down. And it started these alarm bells in my head about, the good guys are never on the side of censorship. History does not show well on that. And my whole life, I was a competitive debater. I'm a lawyer. I still call myself a recovering lawyer now, but I'm a lawyer. So my idea about it is if you're right and you have the data and the evidence to back it, you should never be afraid of open, true discussion, because that's how you convince people of the truth. And so these alarm bells are going off, and I'm having a discussion with Jamie, and I say to him, I just can't believe it, Jamie. I can't believe the people who I worked with my whole life, these agencies I've trusted, would do this to us, do this to the world without data and evidence to support it. And he very calmly looked me in the eyes and he said, Lisa, if they'll poison our water, what won't they do? And it caused my brain to just kind of stop. It couldn't think a way out of that box because I already believe that to be true based on the research I did helping my mom. I use a reverse osmosis water filter. I made sure I had clean water, and it's the most essential thing for our bodies is water. If we don't have it, we die very quickly. So if they'll do that, what wouldn't they do? And he said, if you don't believe me, prove me wrong. And I may have screamed back at him, okay, I will. And then I started doing research with a real open mind and going to sources that I previously would have disregarded, and found out that everything I really believed was a lie. The reality I was living in was a carefully constructed illusion. And, my life has never been the same.
Well, it's quite something. So that turns into your book. So what are some of the key points? We don't have time to cover the entire book, obviously, but give our audience a good flavor of what your book, Deprogramming Democrats and Uneducating the Elites. Tell us about that book.
So the book spends a little bit of time laying out in more detail my background and how I got to where I was, because I think it's important to understand who I am in order to understand my journey. But then it talks about, what happened on the left. How did we get from the big tent of inclusion, where everybody's free to be you and me and we're all in it together, to the cancel culture that we find today? And it looks at really the evolution of the efforts to control our language, in a way to control our thoughts and the reality that we live in, and the use of political correctness to do that. It also looks at the use of fear, and the use of divide and conquer as tools of control, to get people to believe that their very survival is at stake if they don't follow the indoctrination and programming. And then it looks at the tools of control, what words used in order to get us where we are. And it looks at, first of all, our education system in the US, which has over 90% of the professors at this point are Democrats, and 95% of the donations go to Democrats. And that is going to vary based on what what subject you're studying. But in some of these more social science ones, it's very overwhelmingly Democratic. And there's a very large contingent in academia of very far left, radical leftists who believe in critical theory, the deconstruction of our institutions to create a revolution towards a different political system. And then it looks at propaganda and censorship, and the illusion that we've had that we have a free mainstream legacy media in this country, the origins of our media in the country, starting with Project Mockingbird, the CIA project, which I think is very illuminating to people if they've never heard about it. And then it looks at how did our internet develop and how has that been used and controlled, and where did the funding come from in order to create the internet? And then it will lay out why did these tools work so effectively for people on the left. And I should pause for a second and say, I believe there are people on the right who are brainwashed also, but that is not where I came from. So I focus on the left almost exclusively in the book. And then finally, it offers suggestions for you if someone has read this book and they are still within what I call the progressive cult, how to wake yourself up, how to deprogram yourself, but also it's suggestions on how, if there's someone you love or care about who is in the cult, how you may help them begin the awakening process, because no one can really deprogram you. You have to deprogram yourself, but you can, as someone who cares about that person, help create the environment in which they feel safe to do that.
Thank you so much, Lisa Ekman. How can our audience get more information about you and your book?
You can visit my website, which is deprogrammingdemocrats.com. I am on X as deprogramdem, and the book itself is available on Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble.
Please proceed.
Returning to the jobs front, Verizon just announced a big layoff. Verizon has announced the company will lay off 13,000 workers. In the past weeks, I've covered major cutbacks at other companies. These large companies often pay better and have very good employee benefit plans. The challenge is going to be for these employees to find comparable opportunities in a difficult job market. Despite the somewhat rosy job picture I mentioned earlier, my man on the street feedback is that a lot of recent college grads are having trouble finding jobs. I am not sure if all of this is due to the AI boom. Open to suggestions from my audience.
How does the defendant plead?
China attacking America using AI. Well, maybe some of those who were let go by Verizon can upskill and help in the new battle with communist China. Reports are that there have been some recent hacking episodes of important government facilities and major businesses that were accomplished without human input by using AI. The hacks apparently exploited Anthropic's Claude AI, I do not have the tech savvy to fully understand how this works, but I know it's really bad. We won the first Cold War by outsmarting and outgunning the USSR. To win this Cold War, we have to get on board and outmatch and outsmart the CCP. This is not going to be easy, but I have confidence that Americans and their allies can do this. It will take a solid, coordinated effort. No losers like the Biden and Harris in the White House. Elimination of weak commies and socialists at home with our allies abroad in full cooperation. I therefore support the president's push for America to be #1 in AI. That is not just on the commercial side, but also in blocking AI use against America and developing devastating weapons to counteract the CCP and other actors' ability to invade the U.S. and our allies through AI. Time to be in the lead across the board.
Please raise your right hand.
Senator Ernst reveals real use of food stamps. We conservatives are painted by the left as uncaring about the poor. This is absolutely not true. In particular, I want to see the really poor get the help they need. However, if I give someone taxpayer money for food, I want it to go for good food. In a stunning report, one of the senators from Iowa revealed that $524 million in food stamps were used to buy fast food, not healthy groceries. That is now called SNAP. Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. As the word nutrition would imply, this money should be used for real nutrition, not junk food.
Objection, Your Honor.
I know that many of us are curious about how humankind evolved. I certainly am. We were told that somewhere way back, the apes came first. Not sure about that myself. In any event, modern man was identified as being evolutionary descendants of the Neanderthals. That part is pretty well settled, but how do we get this diverse multiracial mix from one strain of ancestors? Part of the problem, of course, is that the origins go so far back in time. It is tough to find evidence of our human ancestors. One fairly recent clue is the 2015 discovery of remains in a French cave of a jaw, dated to about 42,000 years ago. Naturally, they extracted the DNA to explore this discovery. However, the scientists evaluating this jaw somehow determined that it did not share the genetics with other nearby Neanderthals of the same time period. In other words, some type of hermit clan that did not hang with the others was from that period. Thorin, as the scientists named him, did not share specific genetics with other groups of Neanderthals that were within a 2-week walk. I, again, have no clue how the scientists worked all this out. Perhaps the time period was so brutal that they preferred to stay separate for their own safety. I say this since touring a remote village in far northern Scotland, the Orkney Islands, a few years ago. This remote sect of early humans disappeared after a while. The scientists theorized that they moved due to the sea level changing. However, given how remote this group was, an equally possible theory is that they died out due to inbreeding. In modern society, we prohibit marriages within 3 degrees of direct lineal consanguinity. The reason for this goes back to Roman times. Apparently, they discovered if you reproduce too close to your own genetic family, then the likelihood of inherited genetic defects increases dramatically. In other words, crossbreeding strengthens the human race, and we've discovered that with animals. So the further we go back, the more we learn about our distant past.
May I remind you, you're still under oath.
Business students, business persons, or consumers, business law impacts much of what you do. This segment is designed to help you get past the headlines on key stories. Religion versus vaccine in Chavez et al. Versus San Francisco Bart. Thanks to Dr. Harvey Reish in an article from the Brownstone Institute for calling attention to this case. Already fading into memory for many, but not those who were fired for refusing the flawed COVID-19 vaccinations, is the case out of federal court in San Francisco. Across a wide range of employers, including the public sector and military, many were fired for refusing the jab. Many of these cases arose during the second year, not even the first year of the pandemic. 6 employees were fired after refusing to get vaccinated. They relied on a long-standing protection under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that of religious exemption. Now, this does not apply in all cases. The employer must show that it would cause undue hardship, not just an inconvenience, if the employees ask for religious accommodation due to a sincerely held religious belief or medical necessity. So it is not a get out of jail free card, but an opportunity to perhaps be assigned to a different position, shift, etc. The EEOC rules attempt to quantify the degree of undue hardship. An employer will need to assess undue hardship by considering the particular facts of each situation and will need to demonstrate how much cost or disruption the employee's proposed accommodation would involve. An employer cannot rely on speculative or hypothetical hardship when faced with an employee's religious objection, but rather should rely on objective information. That's a quote from the EEOC. So the case is Chavez versus San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit District, also known locally as BART. And there's a new jury verdict. After a hung jury in the first hearing, the second jury found in favor of the fired BART workers who had sued their employers after termination for filing vaccine mandate religious exemption applications. Each of the 6 plaintiffs in the case was awarded more than $1 million by the jury. So this serves as advice to employers to be careful when confronted with various requests for religious or medical accommodation.
Silence in the court.
Southwest Airlines Pilot Association versus Southwest Airlines. In a sad commentary on the changing culture of a company, Southwest Airlines is in a dispute with its pilots union. SWA is based in Texas, has a long history of being friendly and affordable. In fact, when I was doing radio in 2009, I interviewed the outgoing president of SWA, who wrote a nice book called Do the Right Thing. Right. Treat employees right and have them treat your customers right. That seems to have evaporated in the current environment. SWA had a major failure during the 2022 holiday season with 16,900 flights canceled, which resulted in an amazing 2 million passengers being stranded for some time period. The current dispute is with the union representing over 9,000 pilots. The union filed suit in federal district court in Texas. They claimed that the SWA violated the Railway Labor Act, RLA, by intimidating and disciplining pilots who affiliated with the union. The union claimed that the airline had a history of isolating a special category of pilots known as check pilots and standard check pilots, who are also responsible for training and evaluating other pilots. The union alleged that the airline set conditions for check pilots without bargaining and that check pilots were threatened with losing their qualifications if they affiliated with the union. The court dismissed the union's complaint since it was subject to arbitration under the RLA. Part of the ruling by the court referred to the dispute as minor, thereby arbitration was appropriate. The union appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The court found that the union's allegations, including threats and retaliatory actions against the check pilots, supported the claim that the airline's actions were intended to weaken or destroy the union. Therefore, it held that the union's claim of anti-union animus was serious enough to be an exception to the arbitration rule under the RLA. It reversed the district court's ruling, so it now will be heard in court.
I'll allow it.
I'm sure it comes as no surprise that the Trump administration has announced that Harvard will receive no new federal grants until it meets a series of demands recently announced by the Education Department. This action/threat was in a letter to Harvard's president. This is on the heels of a freeze of $2.2 billion in federal grants, while Trump is also pushing to strip the school of its tax-exempt status. The feds accuse Harvard of serious failures in 4 areas: anti-Semitism, racial discrimination, abandonment of rigor, and viewpoint diversity. I want to quickly note that I do not think the second 2 have any relevance to the federal government's enforcement. The first 2, yes. The second 2, I think they're on the wrong track. However, in return, Harvard's president has previously said he will not bend to the government's demands. In fact, the university is sued to halt its funding freeze. My advice would be for Harvard to follow the example of some of the Christian colleges and refuse all federal grants and funds. They certainly have the money to do it.
Order in the court.
American shame, Boulder, Colorado terrorist attack. I am saddened to learn of the terrorist attack in Boulder, Colorado. I was there to speak at seminars in 2004 and 2005. Ironically, it's one of the most peaceful and liberal places in America. So it was the last place that anyone would expected an illegal alien to firebomb a peaceful protest calling for the release of the hostages held by Hamas. Not all protesters were Jewish. At last report, 15 were injured, including a dog, 2 of them critically. One of the injured was a Holocaust survivor. The terrorist is in custody. He has shown no remorse for the attack. Not sure how he expects to support his 5 children while he is likely to spend the rest of his pathetic life in prison. I prefer that he get the death penalty, but that's not likely to happen. I call again, not just for the end of anti-Semitism, but for the end of the recent push to persecute religious persons. I caution Catholics and other religions that if the current attempt to stifle the Jews is successful, they will be next. Further, the rhetoric of violence needs to be quashed, and the famous call for peace and love, folks, needs to return.
The defense rests, Your Honor.
From time to time, Saving America hosts a panel discussion on issues of broad public concern. Today, we're going to discuss Leadership Institute's campus reform. First, the Leadership Institute, founded by Morton Blackwell in 1979, is a nonprofit whose motto is that it turns conservatives into leaders. It provides training and mentorships. LI reported training over 300,000 conservatives to date. I met Mr. Blackwell around 1999-2000 when I was active in the DC area. Second, campus reform is a project of the Leadership Institute. It's described as America's leading site for college news. In turn, it acts as a watchdog over higher education with a focus on exposing left-wing bias in higher education. It holds itself to high standards for journalism that is accurate and objective. Today, we have 2 representatives from campus reform, Dr. Zachary Marshall and Dr. Matthew Garrett. Dr. Marshall is the campus reform editor-in-chief. He earned his PhD from George Mason University and is adjunct assistant professor at the University of Kentucky. His writings appeared in the Daily Wire, Fox News, The New Criterion, American Spectator, Washington Times, Human Events, and the Washington Examiner. He's appeared on Fox News, News Nation, Scripps, Salem, Real America's Voice, Newsmax, and the National Desk. Zachary is a member of the National Association of Scholars and the Academic Engagement Network. Dr. Matthew Garrett is a higher education fellow with Campus Reform. He is a recently retired professor of history and ethnic studies at Bakersfield College. Dr. Garrett's colleagues repeatedly elected him to campus-wide office, received numerous awards, including institution's Lifetime Leadership Award in 2021. He's also an award-winning author with research and publications in Native American history, and his musings appear in both popular and academic journals. Dr. Garrett risked his reputation and tenure to question partisan policies and expenditures at his previous college, result in a highly publicized series of moves by the administration and his lawsuit to defend the free speech and rights of faculty. That has been settled. Dr. Garrett is founder of the Renegade Institute for Liberty and has launched the California Curriculum Center after retiring from academia. He's returning for his second visit with Saving America. And so just to get started, now that we've spent half the show doing the introductions, Dr. Marshall, why is there a need for an organization like Campus Reform?
Campus Reform started in 2009 as a watchdog for liberal bias in higher education. And the problem is that higher education has moved so far left so fast over the last 2 decades that we are now reorienting our mission to expose leftist bias in higher education. We need voices like Campus Reform and the students who expose the bias and abuse for us on a freelance basis, because conservative voices are sidelined and marginalized in higher education. Professors and staff have way too much power to decide what's normal, what is acceptable, and what can be deemed unnormal and what can be deemed unacceptable. And usually that benefits leftist students and penalizes conservative students. And that is not the point of education. So we need external voices like Campus Reform to hold these people accountable.
That sounds good. So what are some of your major accomplishments so far? You've been around for a little while, not real long.
Yeah, I've been at Campus Reform since 2021, and I've been editor-in-chief for the last 3 years. And during that time, one of the biggest undertakings I've led and we have done is exposing anti-Semitism in higher education. Prior to October 7th, no one wanted to talk about it. No one wanted to acknowledge it. I was the first journalist in the country to write about campus anti-Semitism after the October 7th attacks, and I submitted 33 Title VI complaints against universities that failed to protect Jewish students in this fall 2023 semester. That's resulted in 16 federal investigations and $210 million in cut federal funding at Princeton University.
Wow, that's quite a schedule. I have multiple degrees like both of you. As far back as I can remember, it seemed that college students naturally leaned left. Not all of them, of course. Is this a result of faculty inculcation or other factors? Both, if you please.
I would say that the problem really started about 40 years ago when we had postmodernist theory, when we had critical theory, and we had the protest politics of the 70s and 60s become mainstream and become dominant on college campuses. And this process happened in the late 70s to 80s. And since then, we've had subsequent generations of professors and graduate students get promoted in the university and then train the next generation of students and the next generation of professors to not just be liberal, but be rabidly leftist and Marxist in a lot of cases, and learn how to weed out and promote students according to their political ideologies. So this has become a systemic and institutionalized problem since the 1980s.
Yeah, I would agree with that entirely. I think you can look back to William F. Buckley's God Man at Yale, 1951, starting to see that happening. And then by the 1960s, things really start to go off the rails. The new left that becomes so aggressively partisan, so disdainful of Western values, the postmodern movement that wanted to just tear down the concept of truth and anything good, and then replace it with these new Marxist ideologies. It really became dominant by the 70s, and hiring a lot of those activists into the academies in the 60s and 70s, so that by the 80s, we have University of Chicago professor Alan Bloom writing The Closing of the American Mind, where he outlines how the academy has gone off the rails away from seeking truth and trying to help improve people to just this wonky advocacy center that really is doing far less good than it should be doing.
Well, I would certainly tie it to the late 1960s. I started college in, I hate to admit this on the air, but 1969. And I came from a military family. I was from the other side of the tracks, the oldest 7 kids from an enlisted man, and grew up, very, very financially challenged, and won a scholarship at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I showed up there, and I felt so completely out of place as a natural conservative to have the protest against the Vietnam War. I remember walking past the famed statue of Benjamin Franklin in the middle of the campus, and people sitting around the base of the statues doing weed, and out in public, and a lot of very anti-capitalist approach to life. And it's funny because part of Penn's fame is its Wharton School of Economics, first school of business in the United States, and to see what I experienced there. And so I definitely saw it in the classroom. I would say the business school was kind of a saving grace for me. I ended up over there, started as a pre-med, but I understand exactly what you're saying is that it was very overwhelming, and the teachers were in the social sciences were very far left already, and I could see where that was going to happen. And of course, Zachary just mentioned Princeton, which of course is immediately up the road from Penn. They're less than 40 miles apart. And so this has certainly been a disconcerting trend, and it's been at it for a while. So that is a tough situation, because you've got something that's been going on for 50 years now, and the question is, well, how do we get some balance in higher education? Dr. Garrett, you wrote an important article about the extraordinary level of fraud in the California community college system. What's going on out there? You're very familiar with this. My understanding is it's a huge operation. I think the largest in the country, isn't it?
Yeah, the California community college system is massive. It's got over 100 schools. It's got over 1 million students. I think it's massive, and was it 1 million? That might not be right, but it's definitely a gigantic system, and it's got gobs and gobs of money, billions of dollars flowing through it. That's really not been managed the way it ought to be. We've seen the recent case of students or individuals pretending to be students, creating fake accounts, logging in, creating accounts, enrolling for classes, collecting financial aid. And then the colleges, because the way the system is designed, the colleges get paid as well. So there's an incentive to just encourage this. Now, colleges are working to try to fix it, but it is a widespread problem. And part of it stems from this ideological obsession with inclusivity and making sure everyone has access, to the point that there's really no safeguards against fake students coming in. And it also is a program that's really designed to pay for enrollment. So it doesn't matter if you're succeeding or learning, or if it's doing a good job as an institution, it's going to pay for names on papers, on spreadsheets, on rosters. And so we really are seeing a concern with this lack of accountability and an abdication of excellence and preference of equity and inclusion. There needs to be a place for students in the community college system to come and learn, but we also need to have some sorts of standards, some rigor, some assessment to make sure these are actual students, so that our monies are not being spent on fraudulent students.
Well, do you think that there is a turning point happening in California, because a state that was so successful and had such huge surpluses suddenly has, the city of Los Angeles is under an incredible financial situation. And I just saw that in the news recently, but the state itself is hundreds of millions of dollars in the hole. It's probably in the billions. They just haven't gone public with the real numbers. Do you think that there will be are you seeing any type of a change as a result, just financial necessity?
Actually, in California, they're increasing the budget on spending. They're going to keep spending money on that. And there's a proposition from the 1970s that mandates that the money spent on education, Prop 98, I think it is, needs to be a reflection of the statewide budget. And as the budget increases, so does education. And this is resulting this year in an increase in expenditures. So I assume from that the budgets also must be increasing, because I know the budget for education is increasing. And that again is driven by these enrollment numbers. And there's lots of ways to inflate those numbers. We're seeing strange practices to inflate the numbers to justify more spending. We're seeing credentialing, because the new program will give you more money for credentials. So we're seeing artificial credentials created you can get a certificate for field trips, and that gets money to the school. Or you can move a program to a remote campus and make everyone drive an hour. And that appealing to rural students gets you more money to the school. Or you can open up a branch in an institution for incarcerated students, and that gets you additional money. Or dual enrollment. We're seeing a huge push for reaching out to the 8th graders to start enrolling every 9th grader in college, because that's more students. It doesn't matter that they're not academically or intellectually or mature enough to participate in college. We're going to enroll those students because every name we get increases the budget.
Wow, that's an incredible situation. I really anticipated that with the financial problems, they would crank that down. It doesn't sound good. Of course, we haven't even talked about the issue as California's, kind of been a massive sanctuary state, and a lot of these people are not here in the United States legally, and I suspect that's a large number of the people that are improperly in this community college financial aid system.
Yeah, actually, the college system will grant them colleges additional funds for enrolling those students. So there's an incentive to enroll those students, which is, completely a strange phenomenon.
Just amazing.
Motion denied.
The badge of dishonor today belongs to the bogus operation referred to as the ICC, or International Criminal Court, which issued an arrest warrant for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and its former defense minister. This is Dr. David D. Schein, and welcome to a special Saving America episode where I award a well-deserved F grade to an organization, a politician, a so-called celebrity, or another deserving waste of space who ends up in the public eye. The badge of dishonor today belongs to the bogus operation referred to as the ICC, or International Criminal Court, which issued an arrest warrant for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and its former defense minister. This is clearly an anti-Semitic move and causes the whole rational world to discount entirely this organization. You have Israel, the recipient of decades of brutal attacks attempting to wipe out the whole country of Israel, and then the latest atrocity, the October 7, 2023 terrorist rampage that involved unspeakable crimes against humanity. Israel must defend itself, and so to ever suggest that an exercise of self-defense against a brutal enemy is wrong means those who suggest it are part of a criminal conspiracy. That's right, folks. When the ICC goes after Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, and of course Iran, in addition to Kim of North Korea, Putin, and Xi, maybe the ICC will regain some credibility. In the meantime, if the USA is stupidly providing any financial or diplomatic support to the ICC, I call on it to stop. So Saving America awards today's F grade to the International Criminal Court for being indeed the criminals and declaring an arrest warrant for the Prime Minister of Israel, who is defending his citizens and, in fact, the Jewish religion.
Sustained.
Trump seems to have had an impact on the G7 since the focus was definitely real business issues and not this climate change hoax and gender issues from the recent past. The G7 threw out Russia a few years ago, as was previously the G8. It is presently comprised of the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. Reportedly, Trump volunteered that Russia should not have been thrown out. I disagree. I'm glad that this deranged murderer is not being included. This year's meeting was hosted by Mark Carney, the new PM of Canada. He and Trump seem to get along okay. The reported focus was on energy security, artificial intelligence, critical mineral supply chains, and global economic stability. Trump left early to return to D.C. due to the Israel-Iran conflict.
Order in the court.
My visit to Dinan, France. As part of my 4-day tour with a local couple in southwest France, I paid a surprise visit, surprised because I didn't know it was on the agenda, to Dinan, a medieval town with much of the charm still there. An interesting aspect was that when some of these homes were built in the 15th century, the homeowners would sell their wares from their ground level front windows of their houses. So the houses were built with a large shelf outside their front windows. These can still be seen today. The town still has an ancient gate, but it was under repair when I was there. And after 400 or 500 years, maybe a repair job is due.
This session is adjourned.
Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.